My hands genuinely trembled that afternoon in the living room where I grew up, something I never imagined would happen just from turning over a sheet of paper. My gaze was fixed on the indifferent, icy lines that were printed on the legal documents that were arranged on the table made of ebony wood. The very documents I had spent years secretly protecting with everything I owned. Jacob, my younger brother, was grinning smugly and almost frighteningly across from me, as though he had just won a game of math or life chess that I was unaware I was playing. My parents sat up straight next to him, their faces gleaming as if they had just done something holy. "The transfer of Ravenhill to Jacob will be formally signed today," my father declared, his eyes gleaming with delight. They were all unaware that some 20 years earlier, my grandpa, Franklin Westbrook, had surreptitiously created a trust in his own name, and that I was the only legitimate trustee with complete authority over Ravenhill. My name is Charlie Westbrook, and I am the oldest daughter in a distinguished three-generation Virginia legal family. Our family's legacy is symbolized by Ravenhill, a 3-story granite palace situated on a verdant hill just outside of Charlottesville. A location where everyone in the neighborhood looked forward to summer celebrations, weddings, and funerals. When I began working in Washington, D.C., I moved away, but I always made sure to come back on the second weekend of each month. My parents adhered to a custom as if it were the last vestige of their heyday. It was the same this time. It was a message from my mom. "This weekend, dear, come home. Jacob and Jessica will also be present, and we have some amazing news to share." No details, no clues. I figured it was just another family get-together, as usual, and had no suspicions. I had no notion that the most premeditated betrayal of my life was about to happen. When I was 8 years old, I used to chalk doodles on the wrought iron gate, and my green pickup vehicle parked up in front of it. Beyond it, Ravenhill remained erect, the front porch covered with climbing roses, its light gray roof gleaming in the sunlight. I'm grateful to the gardener I pay each month. As part of a custom I usually followed, I went out with a bottle of 2010 Bordeaux, my father's favorite. The aroma of gentle lavender and ancient oak hit me in the chest as soon as I stepped into the Italian tile foyer. I still called this place home. I used to think so, anyway. "Charlie. Here you are." Marilyn, my mother, emerged from the kitchen with her silver hair tied back and still holding a dish towel. She gave me a hug. Shortly, distractedly, as if she was thinking of something more pressing. "The study is open to everyone. Your father wants to talk, so come on in." The sound of laughter came from the other room before I had even removed my outerwear. I spotted my father, Donald, leaning over a large pile of papers with Jacob and Jessica as I walked through the tall glass doors. They each had a whiskey glass in their hands. Without me, the festivities had already begun. My father looked up at the perfect moment, "Charlie," his voice brimming with enthusiasm. Even at 68, he exudes the authoritative demeanor of an accomplished attorney. Expensive tie perfectly straight, salt and pepper hair groomed to perfection. The deal to move Ravenhill to Jacob was just finalized. Within the following 2 weeks, everything will be finished. I felt as though I had been struck in the forehead, and I stood motionless. The words didn't make sense, even though I heard them. Even as my mind replayed them. Give Jacob Ravenhill. I was unable to understand why. Why him? Jacob turned to face me, his eyes shining with victory. I believe the timing is ideal, you know. I am establishing a family with Jessica. Ravenhill is going to be the ideal residence. Jessica gave a clumsy smile, obviously at a loss for words. Always by her husband's side, she was the refined type. Never spend more than 3 seconds staring at me. I tried not to panic. I spoke steadily and softly. Have either of you ever thought about speaking with me first? Or has this choice already been made? My father let out a sigh, as though I had asked an absurd question. You work at the museum and reside in the city. You've never expressed a desire to remain at Ravenhill. In the meantime, Jessica is pregnant and Jacob works at the family law company. This is merely the most logical choice. There was nothing I could say. I couldn't even bring myself to explain that I had been using my grandfather's trust fund, which only I and the family lawyer knew about, to pay the gardener's salary, mend the leaky roof, and pay the property taxes for the last 10 years. They weren't even legally the owners of what they were about to give up. Furthermore, that was just the beginning. You think Ravenhill is yours, so wait, I thought to myself as I put the wine bottle down on the table and turned to face my 32-year-old brother, Jacob, who was being pampered like he was the center of the universe. That afternoon, I walked out of Ravenhill with a knot in my throat. The rage did not blow up. Every thought was seared from the inside out as it simmered. Trying not to crush the throttle pedal, I drove past the gravel lane that led back into downtown Charlottesville and down the hill. Jacob's smug little smile could vanish if he realized that the house was on the verge of foreclosure only 3 years ago. I had been a shadow in my own family for more than 10 years. Never really seen, but always there, always trustworthy. My grandfather, Franklin Westbrook, had recently died when I began sending money to Ravenhill at the age of 26, shortly after I started my first work at the Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. He summoned me into his study before he passed away, and beneath the leather armchair was a painting of his younger self. I will never forget what he said when he handed me a big, sealed packet. Ravenhill is more than just a place. This family's blood and bones are in it. It's not because you're the oldest that I choose you, Charlie. But because no one really knows what that means but you. The documentation of a trust my grandfather had set up when I was 11 were in the envelope. The documents bore the name Franklin Westbrook Trust prominently. After his death, I became the only legal trustee of this separate legal trust that held Ravenhill and the whole surrounding estate. The sole requirement is to keep everything under wraps until Ravenhill's protection is revealed. And I fulfilled my pledge. I didn't say a word to Jacob or my parents for 10 years. While they were unaware of the reality, I gritted my teeth and paid off all of the estate's debts, including property taxes, roof repairs in 2016, and the replacement of the entire plumbing system that had deteriorated since the ADS. I allowed them to continue to think they were in control. I moved about $40,000 annually from my personal account to the trust. I could have invested in my future, traveled, or even purchased my own house with that money. I sacrificed everything. Donald, my father, only ever inquired about my well-being in Washington, D.C., and why I hadn't purchased a new vehicle after working for so long. Even if my mother was kinder, it still hurt more than silence when she dismissed everything I said about my work, acting as though conserving historical relics was merely a pastime. Jacob, meanwhile, received royal treatment. He received a brand new BMW as soon as he finished law school, and I can still picture my mother's eyes light up when he showed me the keys over dinner while I sat silently picking at my veggies. No one brought up the fact that I had received a full PhD scholarship in cultural heritage and conservation the same year. "What are you going to do with that degree?" was all they asked. "Turn into a librarian?" I smiled strangely and continued to send Ravenhill money. I once questioned my father about why I was never given credit for helping to keep Ravenhill going. He answered in a single sentence. "Charlie, doing the right thing doesn't require praise. If you do, you're acting in an improper manner." Before it came from someone who had just, without speaking to anyone, taken his daughter's name off the list of heirs, that vacuous attitude seemed admirable. I'm not a moron. I am aware that Ravenhill is now an asset to them rather than a legacy. Jacob is also the most shiny component in the assets game. He is the son. The married lawyer in the family business is expecting a child. Everything that my parents believe to be consistent and right. In contrast, I am a 36-year-old woman who works at a museum and rents an apartment in Georgetown. Even though I'm the only one who has prevented that place from collapsing, I don't match the conventional image they've drawn. I remained silent. Not once. "Can you take care of this for me?" My father casually forwarded the $18,000 invoice for repainting the porch to our joint email, even after I saw it. I remained silent. I paid nonetheless. For my granddad, I did it. Since I was aware that he had faith in me. However, something broke inside of me that day when my father informed me that Ravenhill would be Jacob and Jessica's in 2 weeks. Like a little crack in a column, but without a big boom. Silent, yet unchangeable. It was time for me to speak up. Furthermore, the time has come to expose the Franklin Westbrook Trust. That night, I didn't sleep at all. My little Georgetown apartment's ceiling was reflected by yellow lamplight, giving me the impression that I was standing in a public area. I could always see Jacob's smiling face next to that heavy pile of papers when I closed my eyes. Ravenhill's transfer. Every syllable was still audible to me, as if they were tapping one by one against my temples. I had already decided by the time the first rays of daylight peeked through the curtains. I made a pot of strong coffee and opened the safe in my bookcase, which contained the Franklin Westbrook Trust's original paperwork as well as 10 years' worth of legal and financial records. Everything was carefully arranged, notarized, and backed up. I could demonstrate that Ravenhill was not my parents' property and that they lacked the legal authority to give it to anybody, including Jacob, in less than an hour if necessary. The legislation wasn't the difficult part, though. I was the difficult part. They would only view me as a traitor if I abruptly resisted because I had been silent for so long. They would merely feel ashamed, they wouldn't give a damn about the truth. Since I had the audacity to reveal them. They believed they had already won the game. Worst of all, it was unclear to me whether I wanted them to know. Because everything would be different after I said it. Kindness, or whatever they saw family unity to be, would be obsolete. In their succession plan, I would end up being the roadblock. And I was confident that Donald, my father, would stop at nothing to restore authority. Even if it meant going to court with his own daughter. But I couldn't allow them to continue their unlawful behavior. This was no longer simply my problem. My grandfather left it to me. He trusted me with the legal duty. Just because I didn't want to start a fight didn't give me the right to disregard it. I was aware that I needed legal support. My grandfather's personal lawyer, Helen Carter, who assisted him in establishing the trust in 2002, was the only one who could assist me at this time. Helen is currently 72 years old, semi-retired, and still runs a modest downtown office. That morning at 10 a.m., I set up a meeting with her at a quiet cafe close to City Hall. She was already there when I got there, dressed in a crisply made navy suit, and her eyes were as sharp as they had been the day I met her at my grandfather's funeral. "Charlie," she replied in a beautiful, deep voice reminiscent of vintage jazz. "Are you here because of Ravenhill?" After I nodded and took the folder out of my leather bag, she meticulously went over each page, without missing a single comma. She nodded slightly when she got to the part where I was listed as the sole trustee. The records are undamaged. All of this is still legally binding. The Ravenhill estate is legally owned exclusively by the Franklin Westbrook Trust. That property cannot be transferred by anyone without your express written permission. Not even your folks. I swallowed hard because hearing that from a lawyer had weight and was authoritative fact rather than something I would say to myself. But I was hesitant to speak up. Everything is going to collapse. I will never be the same in their eyes. "Charlie," Helen continued in a hard, unyielding tone, "they never saw you for who you truly are. Additionally, you are betraying the one person who had the greatest faith in you by allowing them to continue breaching the law. Your grandfather." I was at a loss for words. A fresh business card was given to me by her. "Just in case you need me to formally step in. However, I advise you to take charge of the story. It would be worse if you allowed the title office to tell them the truth." When I got back to my museum office that afternoon, I discovered my mother's email waiting for me. Subject line: "Is it urgent? I urgently need your signature." Content: "Charlie, please. Jacob's attorney has received the Ravenhill transfer documentation from your dad, and in order to formally give up your inheritance rights, they require you to sign a waiver. It's easy, nothing complicated. It's merely a formality. I have already printed the documents and will bring them home this Saturday for your signature because I understand how busy you are. Thank you. I adore you, Mama. I gazed at the final sentence. It's merely a formality. Except when power is involved, everything is always easy for them. I inhaled deeply before typing a single sentence. I believe it's time for us to talk openly about Ravenhill, Mom. And Grandpa. I sent it. And I knew right then. There was no going back. At 3 p.m., I arrived at the former legal office, which was located on the third floor of a red brick building next to Court Square. Sharp. The words Carter and Morgan, legal counsel since 1962, were inscribed in tarnished silver on the frosted glass door. Grandpa and I had visited this place several times when I was a kid, swinging my legs on an oak chair as he and the lawyer discussed something loud and private. I came back today. Not as a girl of 8 years old. But as the one in possession of what my family was unaware of. Ravenhill's legal ownership. Today, Helen wasn't present. She did, however, set me up with a meeting with Mr. Samuel Morgan, the 78-year-old co-founder of the firm who had personally assisted my grandfather in drafting the Franklin Westbrook Trust. The secretary ushered me into a room with walnut paneling, the fading Turkish rug glowing softly in the afternoon sun that came in through bamboo slats. With a cup of tea in his hand and horn-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose, Samuel sat behind his desk. He looked up when I intervened, his blue-gray eyes glimmering with the acerbic acuity of someone who knows the secrets of others. "Charlie Westbrook," he muttered in a gravelly, deep voice reminiscent of charred wood. "You've matured." I gave a nod. "I believe it's time for us to discuss Ravenhill." I put the file on the table without saying anything more. Slowly, he turned each page as he opened it. With each page turn, my parents' decades-long delusion was peeled away. "Original copies," I said. "Together with yearly maintenance costs and tax payment documents. The trust account was used to pay for everything. With the exception of a few crucial situations where I moved money from my own account." For a long time, Mr. Morgan remained silent. He went over everything again, then sat back in his chair and tapped the armrest with his fingers in a contemplative manner. "You know," he started, "not many people fulfill their vows to the dead for this long. I once heard Franklin say, 'Charlie will be able to act morally without recognition. However, I want to ensure that she won't be left alone when the time comes.'" I went cold. Mr. Morgan carefully sealed a yellowed envelope with red wax after opening a drawer. "He left this for you and instructed me to deliver it to you only when the trust was threatened or when you were old enough to make moral decisions." I accepted it. That familiar calligraphy was on the front. "When the time comes, for Charlie." As I cracked the seal, my hands shook a little. There was a lengthy letter on thick paper, written in blue ink. He still had his handwriting. Bold, steadfast, and resolute. "Charlie, my darling. You've arrived at the moment I've always dreaded if you're reading this. When Ravenhill becomes a battlefield for power and selfishness rather than a representation of heritage. You are not the oldest, which is why I didn't pick you. Or due to your gender. You see the worth of this place beyond its bricks and columns, which is why I chose you. You can preserve this legacy without anyone's consent. You simply must keep in mind. Silence is not justice. It's your right. And the accountability. To act morally. I have faith in you. Always." I folded the letter. My throat felt like it was being squeezed, but my eyes were dry. As Grandpa showed me every antique brick and architectural feature, every word brought me back to our walks down Ravenhill. Narrating tales from the 5 generations that called it home. Not to boast. But to instill in me the value of it. With a forceful voice, Samuel put his hand on the file. "This trust is completely lawful, Charlie. It was created in 2002 in accordance with Virginia law, duly notarized, and names you as the only trustee. You have complete control over whether to accept or reject any ownership transfer involving Ravenhill. Without your signature, nobody, not even your parents, can overturn that." I inhaled deeply. I had the sensation of a tightly coiled thread in my mind. Years of keeping quiet and suppressing resentment in order to preserve the appearance of a close-knit family. Everything was coming to an end. I ask, what if they have already entered into a deal with a third party? Once the title office determines that the property is legitimately owned by the Franklin Westbrook Trust rather than by Mr. Donald or Mrs. Marilyn Westbrook, any such transaction would be promptly cancelled. However, he hesitated. I can guarantee you that it will become a painful and public court dispute if you don't speak up. I gave him my full attention. Is it time to speak up now? Samuel Morgan gave a slow nod. Yes, and I will support you. With my grandfather's letter in my backpack, which was heavier than anything I had ever carried, I quietly left the office. The gloomy afternoon sky seemed to be a sign of impending storm. And I would be the one to bring it this time. After leaving Morgan's office, I sat in my car for a while, holding onto my grandfather's letter as if it were the last thing standing between me and the undercurrent that threatened to destroy everything. I eventually unlocked my phone and found the name I had been avoiding all week by scrolling through my contacts. Sutton, Graham. The lawyer working on Ravenhill's transfer paperwork. At the legal practice my father had relied on for almost 20 years, Graham held the position of senior partner. In his 40s, he was sharp, careful, and most importantly, impartial. Graham was therefore my only option if I wanted to prevent this illegal transfer without making it into a full-fledged family feud. I called. It's Sutton. This is Charlie Westbrook. Hello, Graham. I want to talk to you about Ravenhill today. After a moment's silence, his tone became wary. I'm working with Jacob and Mr. Donald to complete the papers right now. If you want to go over the terms again. No, I interrupted. I'm not here to do any reviews. My purpose is to give you information. Information that will invalidate the transfer procedure as a whole. He fell silent. What were you saying? I would prefer not to talk about it on the phone. At 3 p.m., I will be at your office. You'll want to hear this, I need 45 minutes. I hung up without waiting for a response. Graham, wearing a perfect gray suit as if he had just left a global banking convention, greeted me in the lobby of a sleek glass tower in downtown Charlottesville on the 15th level. He ushered me into a tiny, private conference room with a polished silver tray holding a carafe of water, a long walnut table, and no glass walls. Westbrook, Ms. Stillwary, he said. I'm really interested in this. Facts that you brought up. I took the Franklin Westbrook Trust file out of my suitcase and placed each page on the table like the last hand in a high-stakes game. Graham attentively read them as he turned the pages. I observed his lips pressed together as he got to the part that verified the ownership of the trust. Then he raised his head. His eyes had transformed. The haughtiness had vanished, replaced by the keen awareness of a lawyer who knew he was going to get caught in a storm. Are you saying that Mr. and Mrs. Donald do not now own Ravenhill? Slowly, he asked. I said, this is legal proof, and I'm not just telling you. According to the Albemarle County Clerk's Office, I am the only legitimate trustee of the trust, which was established in 2002 with my grandfather as its creator. Furthermore, Mr. Donald is unaware of this. On paper, they haven't had a formal claim for over 10 years, but they think they are the owners. As if he had just found out that his client had declared bankruptcy, Graham sat back in his chair, wiped his face, and let out a breath. Charlie, I'll tell you the truth. The entire transfer process I've been supervising is unlawful if this is true, and I have no reason to think it isn't. I gave a nod. Furthermore, I do not want things to go that far. What are you looking for? I made eye contact with him. Before the transfer is notarized, I would like to halt it. However, the legal card is not a weapon I want to deploy. I'd like to talk. Face to face, with everyone in attendance. As the lawyer in charge of the transfer, I also need you to be present to verify the information. Graham blinked, that was obviously unexpected. Do you want me to support you? I want you to choose the truthful side. I'm not asking you to turn on your customers, but the court will void the entire transaction if you move forward with this transfer without revealing the trust's existence. And that will turn into a controversy for your company as well as for my family." After pausing, he gave a small nod. "I get it." There was a long pause before Graham resumed his conversation. "If you're on board, I'll set up a family gathering for tomorrow night at Ravenhill. I'll let Mr. Donald and Jacob know that several legal issues require clarification. The others? I'll let you speak for yourself." My heart felt like it was squeezed in someone else's grasp as I gripped my handbag tighter. However, I gave a nod. "I'll be there with the truth and all the paperwork." Graham got up and reached out to shake my hand. He shook hands decisively and firmly, without hesitancy. "Charlie, good luck. It appears that your family is in for a night to remember." As I drove through the rusting iron gates of Ravenhill the following evening, a light rain started to fall. Like countless question marks reverberating through my head, tiny droplets made their way down the windshield. What are they going to do? Denial? Fury? Or will their perception of me change at last? Jacob's SUV, its tires still covered in mud, was parked haughtily in front of the main gate. With the green leather folder firmly grasped in my hands, I parked a bit further back, under the old oak tree where I used to play hide-and-seek with Grandpa. It contained everything. Records of property ownership, bank statements, repair receipts, and trust paperwork. It would all be exposed tonight. As I entered the spacious sitting room, it was glowing brightly. Marilyn, my mother, was standing by the fireplace with a white wine glass in her hand. Donald, my father, was sitting up straight in a leather recliner with his legs crossed and his eyes as cold as steel. Jacob sat on the couch with the arrogant look of someone who considered this meeting to be a pointless formality. With his arms folded and his eyes looking around the room, Graham Sutton stood near the window. "Charlie." My mom made an effort to smile. "At last, you succeeded. We were just talking about Ravenhill's renovation plans. Jacob came up with some fantastic kitchen ideas." I didn't answer. Instead, I gently opened the document folder after setting it on the oak coffee table. "We're not talking about kitchens tonight," I stated in a clear and firm voice. "We're talking about Ravenhill's legal ownership and the truth." There was silence in the room. I took out the Franklin Westbrook Trust's notarized copy as the first document and put it in my father's direction. "Grandpa set up this trust back in 2002. It is Ravenhill's only legitimate owner. He gave it his whole ownership. Additionally, since I was 21, I have served as the only trustee." My father merely scowled at me without touching the papers. "We are the ones on the deed, so what are you talking about? The taxes have been paid." I interrupted, "You haven't paid a cent in the last 10 years. "I have, both from my personal account and the trust, if that wasn't enough." The statements are as follows. Bank statements, tax returns, roof fixes, electrical system improvements, and even Mrs. Jenny's pay. I was the source of everything. I shoved my mother the next pile of papers. As she looked at the figures, her face turned pale. Although she had always taken great satisfaction in overseeing the family's finances, the reality had forced her to step outside of her comfort zone. Jacob leaped to his feet. "Wait a minute. Are you claiming that you own this facility and have complete decision-making authority? That is absurd. Graham, what is going on with the legal transfer that Mom and Dad planned?" All eyes were on Graham, and he remained unflinching. I checked the documents Charlie gave me to be sure they were legal. The trust is entirely legitimate. That trust has owned Ravenhill for more than 10 years. The legal owner is no longer the Donald family. Additionally, Charlie has complete control over all decisions pertaining to this property in his capacity as trustee. "This is treachery," my father snarled. "You stole everything without our knowledge, and now you're here to give us a lecture." I spoke quietly but firmly as I stared directly at him. "No, Dad. When you and Mom left Ravenhill, I took care of it. It wasn't my intention to take control. My belief in Grandpa's heritage led me to take action. Sacred, the one you constantly referred to. And yet nearly gave it to Jacob as if it were a disposable trophy. Silence for a beat. I inhaled deeply. However, I'm not here to reclaim Ravenhill. I have a deal to give. Jacob laughed. A bargain? Do you believe that you are now the queen? I turned to my parents, ignoring him. I won't stop Jacob from moving here if he still wants to. However, there are restrictions. 1. Any significant improvements must be examined and approved, and he must respect Ravenhill's historical integrity. 2. He can no longer live comfortably on the backs of others, he must share financial responsibility for maintenance. 3. I have to be very clear about my role. Don't treat me like the museum girl any longer. My father looked aside, and my mother closed her eyes. Jacob's expression grew gloomy as Graham scrawled notes. It's okay if you disagree, I added softly. Ravenhill will be turned into a heritage conservation site by myself. Private homes are not permitted. Not even relatives. Like a sentence being passed down, the quiet dragged on. At last, my mother's voice was as quiet as a sigh. Charlie, you've changed. I grinned. It was a smile of relief after years of being ignored, not one of triumph. No, Mom, I simply quit putting up with it, I haven't changed. I went back to Ravenhill 2 days following the tumultuous family gathering. With a different attitude this time. I returned as the person Grandpa trusted with authority, no longer the underappreciated daughter or the secret keeper. And now, the one making this house's destiny. I delivered a revised draft of the negotiation parameters that I had spent the entire night honing, and Graham had written a memorandum. The only space in Ravenhill where I had ever felt fully seen was the library, where the meeting was held. Maybe because my grandfather's presence was still there. Donald, my father, appeared calm despite his weariness. Marilyn, my mother, appeared calmer, although there was a hint of caution in her eyes. Jacob was clearly irritated, but at least he refrained from making a snide comment when I entered. Graham started. To guarantee that Ravenhill is administered lawfully, protected as a heritage property, and that stability is retained within the family, we are here to talk about a cooperative solution that involves all parties. I pulled out my draft after nodding. After reading the family's counterproposal, I agree with 3 of its points in principle. To start, we create the Westbrook Heritage Foundation, a nonprofit, to manage Ravenhill's finances, upkeep, and general operations. I turned to face my dad. The board of this foundation would consist of Jacob, Mom, you, and myself. However, at least 3 board members must authorize any expenditure exceeding $25,000. Slowly, Donald nodded. That's reasonable, it guarantees financial supervision while allowing everyone to have a say. Second, I went on. With some renovation rights, Jacob and Madison are allowed to move into the East Wing as long as they don't encroach on the historically significant architecture listed in the 2018 Preservation Review. Jacob's eyebrows went up. Furthermore, who gets to judge what constitutes interference? Without hesitation, I said, I'll consult with a separate preservation specialist. Additionally, the board of the foundation must approve all plans. Leaning back in his chair, he remained silent. At last, I lowered my voice a little. I am still the Franklin Westbrook Trust's only legitimate trustee. Any significant alterations to Ravenhill are subject to my ultimate veto. Silence fell on the room like a wave. That portion couldn't be negotiated, but I knew they didn't like it. Grandpa left behind this legacy. Is it not a plot of land that can be divided like a poker pot? Marilyn's surprise question helped to defuse the situation. Additionally, would you like your money back? I gave a headshake. No, but I would like it to be officially recorded in the Foundation's files. This is the $537,400 financial contribution history for the previous 10 years. This covers staff salaries, property taxes, repairs, and upkeep expenses. I want the truth to be accepted, but I don't want my money back. Donald remained motionless, staring at the spreadsheet. Finally, he said something. He spoke in a hoarse, low voice that was no longer bitter. Charlie. You lived far away, I thought. Disconnected. Ravenhill doesn't really matter to me. However, it appears. I was mistaken. I took a deep breath. Dad, you weren't incorrect. You simply didn't pay much attention. I didn't care, therefore I didn't stay away. Knowing that I would always be a shadow in someone else's account of events if I stayed close, I chose to keep my distance. Marilyn lightly touched the table with her hand. Can we then work together to rebuild that story going forward? I gave a nod. Realm stood collecting the documents. If there are no further disagreements, I will update the agreement in accordance with today's terms. Within a week, we may formally sign it. Jacob got up, approached me, and cautiously extended his hand. For the first time since it had all fallen apart. I'll try for Ravenhill, not for you. I gave him a handshake. For Grandpa and both of us, Jacob. The clouds had lifted and the sky was clean and high as I departed Ravenhill that afternoon. Even if it would take some time for the rifts between my family and I to mend, at least. We were in the process of rebuilding. With truth instead of lies. And long overdue acknowledgement. 3 weeks following that momentous discussion, we entered a Charleston downtown legal firm together. As a family attempting to re-establish harmony following years of disarray, rather than as rivals fighting over inheritance. Ravenhill's weathered wooden halls were a sharp contrast to the sleek, contemporary glass edifice. However, today was a momentous day that could not be reversed. Graham Sutton had everything all ready. The Westbrook Heritage Foundation's charter, each member's financial pledge, operational guidelines, and, lastly, the formal documentation of the more than $500,000 I had spent over the previous 10 years to prevent Ravenhill from collapsing. I had my hair pulled up and was dressed in a basic charcoal suit. I was the embodiment of Grandpa's will today, entering that room with a clear sense of purpose, no longer the quiet daughter at dinners full of contemptuous looks. Donald, my father, appeared tired yet calm. Marilyn, my mother, sat more quietly than I had ever seen her and applied less cosmetics than normal. Last to come was Jacob, accompanied by his wife Madison, who had maintained her neutrality during the entire conflict. However, the person who surprised me the most was Catherine, Jacob's ex-wife. Catherine and I had maintained a friendly relationship despite their discreet divorce 2 years prior, thanks to her ongoing support of the museum. She offered to be my emotional support system and witness this time. As we waited outside the conference room, she whispered, I know I'm no longer a part of that house. Ravenhill is more than just a location, though. It's memories. And it's important for someone who understands memories to maintain them. Graham's composed, businesslike tone kicked off the proceedings. We are present to legally sign the legal paperwork that recognize the new management structure and create the Ravenhill Preservation Trust. In turn, each person signed. I felt a peculiar sensation when I put pen to paper when it was my time. Closure, not victory. 10 years of patience, quietness, and silent contribution. Each sealed with a red stamp and a signature. Graham looked up when the moment came to recognize the monetary contributions. He spoke in a more formal tone. We formally acknowledged Ms. Charlotte Westbrook's $537,400 total gift. From 2013 to 2023, Ravenhill will be maintained, repaired, and preserved using money that was fully taken from her own finances. The estate might not have lasted to this day without this contribution. Jacob sat motionless. He remained silent, but I could see his gaze resting on the printed image of the 2017 roof installation. The one I emailed to the contractor when he was in Florida playing golf with his father. We sat in the conference room until all the paperwork was signed, and nobody hurried out. People who once believed they would never be able to sit at the same table again were able to settle into a tranquil moment. Then Catherine suddenly got up and held up her glass of water. I am aware that this story is no longer about me. However, I have one thing to say. Charlie is deserving of becoming Ravenhill's representative, both in name and spirit. She did more than simply maintain the house. She kept this family's identity and memory intact. My throat constricted. For a minute I was unable to speak. After giving a small nod, my father got up. I used to believe that you were a person who lived in the past and held on to antiquated and deteriorating items. But I see now. The only person with the courage to prevent the past from being altered is you. And I am aware. Your grandfather had good reason to believe in you. Madison smiled slightly at me. For the first time since it all started. Something had changed between us, but there was no warmth. Perhaps it was recognition. Perhaps a silent act of appreciation. I walked more slowly as we exited the office, taking in the glass building's reflections of Charleston's gentle afternoon light. Catherine carried the document folder as she walked next to me. She replied softly, "So it's done." I gave a small smile. No. It's only the beginning. Ravenhill remained, a place teeming with ghosts and rich memories. However, I no longer felt like the person silently stoking the fire in the darkness for the first time. Now, as I stood in the vast hall and lit the flame, I allowed the old secrets to become a legacy rather than a burden. A heritage that was authentically mine, despite its imperfections. Reclaiming a piece of property wasn't the only aspect of my narrative. It was about taking back who I was. Once forgotten in the scramble of power and inheritance, she was shunned by her own family. However, every tough choice taught me that requesting attention isn't the way to get it. It results from upholding your moral principles. Yes, Ravenhill was saved. More significantly, though, I had defended my dignity and my voice. And I genuinely want to leave that legacy. How do you feel about Charlie's choice and her treatment of her family? Leave a comment below with your opinions. For more heartwarming, real-life family stories, remember to subscribe to the channel.